Good evening, Bill Wadman.
Good evening, Sandy. How are you?
I'm fine. We've had an interesting week together, haven't we?
Yes.
We've
What,
just been
you mean
talking.
coming into your class and whatnot?
Yeah, so this is one of those weeks where Bill gets roped in to being the real life photographer for my student.
As opposed to the photographers and books that are long dead?
Yes, or indeed me.
Sure.
That would be a wild idea that your photography teacher actually takes photographs. Anyway, you came in, you wowed them with your
Wowing
charm,
them.
wit, so on.
Yeah.
Anyway, over all this time of talking, all these many episodes that we've done, we're talking about artworks that fundamentally are always put somewhere. And also, when we're like thinking about art in a kind of Western context, we're thinking about things that are owned
hmm
and are purchased, bartered with, swapped.
Yep.
And so I've been thinking a lot about collecting art. What does that mean?
Do you
Um,
collect art?
I do collect things, and I've thought about this for myself. You're right, I do collect things, but often I'm given things. I'm not buying them.
Okay.
And probably like you, because I know a lot of people who are artists, and also obviously I have students who are artists who leave and often give me gifts of art, their art. I do have quite an extensive collection of things in that way. Um, but I'm trying to think if I've ever actually bought a piece of art for myself. And I don't think I have. I've bought posters that I framed that remind me of events, particularly things like, uh, shows, ballet or art exhibitions over the years that have really thrilled me. And I've maybe bought some merchandise like a poster and framed it. But apart from
Yeah.
that, I haven't gone and sat in an auction.
Now, do you do that for yourself so other people see them on the walls because you think they're pretty? Do you do them for the potential value of them later? Are any of those things that you care about?
Um, I don't know. I guess it's like dressing oneself, isn't it? I put the posters. I actually tend not to hang art. I tend to lean it places so I can change it if I
Okay.
want.
Okay.
Um, I like seeing things that identify me to myself.
Yeah.
I get a
We
bit
surround
muddled.
ourselves by the person we want to be.
Well, yes, I can't think of putting something on the wall for somebody else. Although I suppose I might. I mustn't be disingenuous about that. A sense again that I'm performing. The home is a performance space, isn't it?
Sure.
Often.
Yeah.
Anyway, do you collect art, Bill?
Um, yeah, but a handful of things, some things that I've purchased and a few things that were given to me. So similar to you.
Mm,
Um, but I want to be better about it. Sometimes my wife and I will say, maybe we should, spend a little money on, a photograph by this person that we really like, or, buy a Saul Leiter print or something like that. Um, and it's funny, as somebody who wants to sell their own work at times,
mm,
and I know that it's perfectly reasonable for somebody to charge two, three, five, $10,000 for like a print of something that is something I really care about that might actually be well known. It
mm.
still is just like $10,000 for a piece of paper. um, it's hard for me to swallow, even if I myself am on the other side of that equation at times.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, I do, and I want to do more, if that makes sense.
But I'm interested in why we want to own art.
Well, why do we want to see art in real life versus see it in a book? I mean, isn't that similar? It's like, it's the experience of having it. Is it the experience of, is it controlling it somehow by owning it?
Yeah, I do wonder about this also in context of, you and I are ordinary people, and we have an ordinary person budget.
Speak for yourself.
We are extraordinary, ordinary people. There you
Hmm
go. But, people who have vast wealth and who
Sure.
collect art, in a sense of being investment purchases.
Yeah, and keep it in a airport in Switzerland for the next 10 years.
Yeah, I'm thinking that as far as I can be honest about it, I find that really shitty.
Yeah, and as we know, you know, a lot of that just it never gets seen, right? It's like, these people are just they literally, like you're saying, it's like an investment vehicle. It's just sad.
Yeah, I mean, so I was looking up actually collectors. I think I typed in something like, the most famous or wealthiest art collectors in the world or something. And an amazing article came up that listed, I think, the top 10 or top 20 art collectors for the value of the collection that they have
Yeah.
that's theirs. And the first uh, one that I've got for us is, we've talked about this before actually. This is Madonna by Monk.
Is
The
this on
version
loan to the Munch Museum owned by somebody else?
No, actually, I'm going to tell you about it only
Okay.
because I put them in time order, not value of
Oh,
collection order.
got it.
So 1894, we know that Munch painted several versions of this. There's one in the museum, and also actually, when we spoke about it before, it had been stolen. It's been found, or it was found, returned to the gallery. Um, there's also another one in a different gallery somewhere, and then I think there are three in private collections. And the one that I want to think about mostly is it, oh gosh, what's his name? Have I written it down somewhere? Mm, I can't find his name, but the man who owns this has got something like $1 billion worth of
Wow.
art.
Sure.
And I got to thinking about, a painting such as this that has many different iterations, or at least more than one version.
Hmm.
Does it kind of soften the blow that it's taken away from us?
Because we have
And
other ones that we can see.
yes, so, I also was thinking also just about the futility of this, the sense that a gallery would have the painting um, on loan, and that a public gallery, then has to give it back. So that there's a sense of like reveal and conceal.
Sure. Yeah. There was a Van Gogh exhibit at the Met 2 years ago, I think it was.
Mm,
Maybe last summer. Anyway, there was, a bunch of stuff, a lot of it really amazing. And then there was one painting in the back that I thought was my favorite of the bunch,
mm.
and it's owned by Larry Ellison, the Oracle guy. And so this is probably in his house somewhere, maybe. Or maybe it's in the office of Oracle, or maybe it's actually just in a storage unit and it never gets seen. I was like, this is the best painting of the bunch and it never gets seen.
Well, we're going to come to this. I've been writing again a little bit, which is lovely for me. I know that you and I come in and out of periods of writing.
Yeah.
And I've been writing about painting, fiction. And
Mhm.
one of the things that I've brought into the narrative is that paintings fundamentally want to be seen. That's ultimately like the key to the story that I'm writing.
Sure.
And it struck me, this is I just saw his name, Stephen or Steve Cohen. He is somebody I think who, like others on the list we're going to look at in a minute, has, what is the reason he's he's purchased this? Like, does he love Monk?
Maybe, or maybe it's diversification and he just wants to have money in different ways in different places.
Yes, it's part of a
Does it
portfolio.
matter though? If let's say he happened to be a billionaire because he,
Mm,
was a child of some billionaire, whatever it is, but he really, 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 really loved art.
yeah,
He was us, but
yeah.
he just happens to have $1 billion. Is it wrong for him to buy these things? They're for sale.
Well, this is where I'm kind of at. I'm trying to put myself in a position of being the person who can afford to buy a painting I truly love that might be very
Mhm.
famous.
Yep.
And I do question whether I would be careful about the acquisition, that I didn't hog it from myself. or hide it.
You would lend it out and that kind of thing.
I think it ought. I think that art somehow ought to be in the public domain. Now
Okay.
that's tricky because then we
Yep.
could say, well, at what point does art become not famous enough that it can, remain in anonymity or behind the scenes or just in
Sure.
somebody's home?
Yeah. What if somebody doesn't want their work seen? I was talking to my friend today about Maloof, showing off all the, what's it called, photographs. What's her name? Uh, uh, Not a big fan of her work. You know what I'm talking about. The one where they found all of her negatives and
Oh,
the
Vivian.
nanny lady. Yeah, Vivian Mayer. And like, she didn't seem to want her stuff seen and he's making her stuff seen. I mean, like there is I don't know.
But
It's I mean,
I want us to put ourselves on the side of collector, right? So
sure,
I
sure.
almost feel like we need to dig into the other side of this.
But are you saying that if you say had $100 million and bought this monk,
Yep.
if you didn't want it shown, that's up to you as the owner, and that should be the way it is? Or are you saying that the painting has rights of its own, even though you own it?
I'm really starting to believe that painting has its own right.
Okay,
Now,
I don't necessarily disagree with you.
well,
Yeah,
I just think that somebody owning something
yeah.
is separating that thing from everybody else fundamentally.
Okay,
This really fascinates me. So, on the top of that list that I found online, the person or people who are credited as being the most uh, prolific of collectors, the people who've got the biggest collection, are Ezra and David Nahmad. Now, David Nahmad is an art dealer,
okay.
and quite how that should justify the vast wealth that he and I think it's his brother have. I don't know, so I suspect there is some other financial input into their
Or
lives as
they
well.
bought a lot of these paintings 50 years ago or 60, 70 years ago, or they came into the family before they were worth as much as they are now, and they just, you know,
Well, no, I mean their collection is full of impressionist and modern art, and then the total collection is worth $3 billion.
yeah,
The collection, just
yeah.
their art
No, I
collection.
listen. There's an art dealer that my mother worked with at a law firm she worked at, and when the woman
Mm.
died, it was $1.2 billion worth of art.
Well, this to me also is an amazing kind of revelation. I know very little about the art dealing world.
Yeah.
Um, I don't encounter dealers. I mean, my dad has a gallery in Glasgow, but it's a very small gallery. It's by appointment only, and it's very local in that it's usually Scottish artists
Hmm.
who are
Not selling for $15 million.
no.
Yeah.
This is one of the many Picassos that are owned by, I'm just going to say David Nahmad.
Hmm.
And um, I was really starting to be very judgy when I was reading about them. And I was getting particularly narked because I read that most of their collection is stored in a tax-free warehouse in
Hmm.
Switzerland, right?
Hmm.
And I was really getting to a point where I was fuming, I was raging. And then I came across a story about them donating, well, no, I'm going to revise that word, providing a painting from their collection to be auctioned for charity, I think.
Okay.
And so you could buy a ticket for in this raffle for like €100. And a few years ago, apparently, like 2013, a young man in Pennsylvania, he was a sprinkler system, fire sprinkler fitter. He won an image that I think was worth about $1 million. Anyway,
Nice.
this in 2020 was up for raffle. It's Picasso, it's Nature Mort. There are lots of different versions of this as well, or with this title. Um, and it's valued at about $1 million.
Right.
Now,
Not the
what was
Picasso I
interesting,
would buy, just if you're looking for something to get me for Christmas, this is not the Picasso you should get me.
well, what I thought was really interesting, I started out by saying it was donated by David Nahmad. It wasn't. He had been promised a fee of $1 million payment for it. because the organizers had been told by him that it would be valued between 2 and 3 million.
Right. So it's all shifty stuff going on behind the scenes.
Well, I mean, a woman won it. I tried to find it as another, like, find it a different way, like what its value would be. Some estimates were saying it was like $799,000. Some
Well,
people said it was worth a
listen,
million.
if the painting's worth $1 million, but you get enough people to put in 500 quid or 1,000 for the raffle that they end up raising 4 million, you can pay them 1 million and still walk away with 3 million bucks.
Sure, yeah.
Yeah,
But I just was kind of astonished that they paid him a fee. Now, as it happened, it wasn't actually him who asked for it. It was the organizers because they felt that by giving him what they felt was still a fair fee, they
hmm,
would encourage other collectors to donate to them to raffle.
okay,
I don't think people have come forward in the way they'd hoped. But there's lots
yeah,
of conflict in this for me. I love the idea of an ordinary person winning a Picasso.
sure.
Um, but then I have to be careful there's not a hypocrisy in that because does that ordinary person take the Picasso home and hang it on their wall?
Yeah, how different is it? Why is it better for the ordinary person to have it than this guy?
Exactly. And also, I would imagine, although I can't be sure, that if you win a Picasso, like you said, this would not be the one you want. What are you going to do with it? You're going to sell it.
Sure.
So you're
Yep.
just putting it back into the pool
And if you don't sell it, you got to insure it, and that's expensive.
of, right. Anyway, I find the whole thing kind of ugly.
Yep, it
Um,
is. Yeah.
so no matter what direction I come at it from, it seems unsavory somehow. And where I have these little peaks of like, oh, well, it's okay because, he raffled it. Or, oh, it's okay. There are 5 of these.
Sure.
Everywhere I look with collecting art, I have a problem with it.
Well, I watched an episode of Fake or Fortune the other day. I like that
Yeah.
show. And they had a woman who came in with some drawing. I forget who the artist was. But anyway, they said, what happens if we authenticate this? She goes, "Oh, I'm going to sell it." She goes, "I don't even like it."
Hmm.
She's like, it was given to my father by this person. Like, I don't even, and Fiona was like aghast that this woman didn't want this, whatever it was, drawing on her wall. And she's like, why do I want that on my wall? I'd rather have the, $500,000 or whatever it is.
Hmm.
Um, and so, I mean, there is also this thing of it's assumed that you would want it and put it on your wall.
But also, I think there is a problem in my own thinking about it because I'm looking at a painting that I fundamentally don't like, and I'm thinking, as you said, if I won it, I'd be disappointed.
Oh, I'd trade it in and get something I did want, or 10
Right.
things I did want.
But again, you've said it, you nailed it. Like, how different is it that ordinary people react or act like this around expensive pieces of art
Sure.
compared to these fabulously wealthy collectors? There's no difference between us.
No.
We're still being very greedy.
Yep.
We're still being transactional.
Yep.
And the whole process is something that separates the art from the public domain.
Sure.
Now, the next one is kind of interesting because Two Marilyns is in the Broad Museum in LA.
Okay.
Broad Museum. I don't know if have you been there,
I've
Bill?
never been. No.
Um, so Eli Broad, and I'm assuming it's his wife Edith, are philanthropists, and they
Of
have
course.
again massive
I love
wealth.
how that's a job, by the way.
Yes. Well, the
What's your
collection is
career? Oh,
worth
I'm a philanthropist. Like, wait,
well,
you
the
what?
collection is worth 2.2
Of
billion
course it is.
dollars,
Sure.
right?
Yeah.
But the difference with this is that they have created an art foundation and they built a gallery
Hmm.
and they put their collection in it so people can go see it.
Okay. So it's a
Right.
museum, but everything's still owned by the family.
So yes, ownership is the
Well, let me
family.
throw one more thing in. I bet you half of it's for a tax break. You know?
Well, it's hard not to be cynical, isn't it?
Sure.
I have to
Yeah.
say, if you go on the Broad Gallery website, there's so much about it that seems to be trying really hard to not be self-conscious about its own wealth and status.
Mhm. The website
Um,
itself, even.
yeah, I mean, I noticed like if you click on it on the about bit, it comes to a bit where it talks about diversity apprenticeship program and so on. So there's
Hmm.
lots of outreach, there's lots of stuff about the gallery that feeds a wider
Yeah,
community.
but these people are not selling their stuff and giving their money to the poor. You could argue that they're even doing those kinds of things as a PR angle.
You could, but I have to say, in a sliding scale of how acceptable collecting is to me,
Sure.
I think that to collect art and then share it,
Yep.
albeit whilst retaining ownership rights, is the only moral thing to do.
Okay, fair enough. So wait, I have to put my William Coupons and my Dan Winters and my Jamie McKelveys. I got to put this stuff out on the street.
No, because then I have to be honest, and I say, well, when does a piece of artwork become such that it has to go into a public space,
Hmm.
has to be in the
Yep.
public domain? That's
What's
the
your
that's
answer?
the clincher with this. This is the thing that is starting to really confuse me. The thing that I find most interesting about this whole situation is that I obviously have really, really strong feelings about these paintings shouldn't be in a warehouse in Switzerland, for Christ's sake.
Right.
Let us see them.
Sure.
And of course, yes, they'll be on loan, they'll be loaned out to galleries, but the fact they have to come back,
Hmm.
um, but I think yeah, I think it's hypocrisy on my part, really.
I mean, there was stuff in that Sargent show that was at the Tate that was, loaned from private collections. Like, you
Yeah.
people have Sargents in your house?
No, but again, maybe they don't, Bill.
Yeah, but I mean, I feel like, especially with an artist like that, often it actually is just the family happens to own the painting of their great grandmother or whatever. That also happens too. But go ahead. Tell me about this one.
Oh, Gillian Ayres, I mean, she's, possibly one of the most important 20th century, British 20th century painters. Um, her work, I found an anecdote very interesting. I read recently it's a brilliant and funny, warm and witty little book, A Little Art Education by Lynn Barber. I really enjoyed it.
Okay.
And in it, Lynn Barber, the writer, journalist, worked for Vanity Fair and I think, lots of newspapers in the UK for a long time. Made it her business to go about interviewing artists. She found it thrilling. Um, anyway, I was reading about her, I guess, friendship with Gillian Ayres, and part of the saddest thing in the interviews that they held was how saddened and distressed Ayres had been that having sold 15, I think, of her canvases from her Indian suite to Shirley Conran, the former wife, Terence Conran, who
Hmm.
was her friend, instead of having them, as I think Gillian Ayres maybe hoped, in Shirley Conran's home, Shirley Conran had put them in the Momart warehouse in Leighton in London.
Yeah.
And then I don't know if you know about this, but it got broken into and set on fire. And like insurers couldn't even value the loss because it was a lot of contemporary British art was in there, including a lot of Ayres's work. And it struck me that it was an interesting thing that between friends, the exchange of art perhaps wasn't as personal and intimate as the artist had hoped.
Or maybe that person has so much art they don't have enough wall space to put it up and they recycle around. Or
Yes.
maybe, and the question is by burning it, is that better than it existing in solitary confinement in a storage warehouse?
No, I mean, I have to say that the Momart fire, goes down in history as being the travesty of
Yeah.
contemporary British art.
It's
You
like
know,
the fires that happened in LA that burned up all of the original recordings of a bunch of stuff.
right. So this is a big deal. It was uh 2004. It had lots of young British art in it. Tracy Emin's tent was in there, for example.
Sure.
And whatever I think people feel and think about the young British art movement and the kind of controversial artists that were born out of that period, nonetheless, their work is important, uh, and should be respected as part of this history we have of our
Who
art
gets to
movement.
decide what art is respected?
I think art is respected because it's made.
No, but I mean, who gets to decide which things are should be put on a pedestal like that? Because I bet you if you did a broad survey of British or American public and you asked who Tracy Evans was, I don't think 98% of the people would even know what the name is. So
I mean,
does
you've
that
said this
stuff
to me
matter in
before.
that way?
You've said this to me before, and I
Yep.
can tell you now, just as an aside about the fire in Leighton, that a lot of people were reported in the press at the time. It's actually being glad that a lot of that art had gone up in smoke,
Yeah. Yeah.
because they found it ridiculous, an
Right.
embarrassment that
Sure.
British art had come to the point where,
I'm just
you
saying
know,
I'm not trying to pick on her as a woman or as a British person. I'm just saying like contemporary art in general, the average person has no idea who any of these people are.
I think don't maybe be so judgmental from an
I'm just
American
saying I
perspective.
don't know
Hang
who most
on.
of these people are. Yeah.
From an American perspective, I think,
Yep.
remember, the population of Britain is a lot smaller than the US,
Okay.
but the press is just as obvious,
Okay.
right? And there's a lot of coverage pretty much since, I would say, the Young British Art movement. So many people started to know about contemporary art at that point because, I mean, the show that nailed it was the Sensations show.
Sure.
But actually, names didn't become household names because they were being celebrated. They were often being
Denigrated.
vilified. They were often being
Sure.
torn down. Artists
Yeah.
were being really kind of abused, I guess.
Yeah.
But nonetheless, it did make them mainstream in some way.
Sure. Well, I guess that then I'll just speak for the US and say that, even US contemporary any artist since 1990, I don't know that anybody could name an artist since 1990 in America.
Mm.
In America. The visual arts just have like lost that importance, which is interesting because these things keep getting sold to rich tech billionaires and things, right? Like this still happens.
Truthfully, I
But
would
it
probably
almost
have
feels
a
like it's
much
more
harder
and more of
time.
a, yeah,
I would
go
have a
ahead.
much harder time naming contemporary American artists than I would naming contemporary British artists.
Yeah. So maybe that is the press. Maybe it's just an awareness thing. But regardless, it's just an interesting take on, you know, Pollock had articles in Time in Life magazine, right? No
Mm.
one's doing articles on any of these artists now in some major publication that everyone reads and everyone knows and has read about and would talk about at a dinner party. It just isn't that like the arts are not that way in American society, at
Mm.
least American society. So it's interesting to me that there is still this art world that's happening that's its own little echo chamber, almost completely separated from the world that most people are living, you know? It's interesting.
So the point of this, though, and the reason why it's here is because this work is collectible,
Yep.
right? It's collectible and it was collected.
Would you own this one at your house?
Hang on.
Okay.
Collectible and it's collected and then it's, inadvertently destroyed.
Yep.
Um, I don't know if I'm trying to kind of validate the the horror of works being taken and put in a warehouse.
Mm-hmm.
But because that work was taken and put in a warehouse rather than kept even in somebody's uh, home, it was destroyed. Now, of course, there could be a fire in someone's house. There could be a fire in a gallery.
But you're saying it's being concentrated in a warehouse.
But, there was just all this art that is part of our culture, whether we like it or not.
Mm-hmm.
And it seemed that it was so sad that it was all gathered there just to sort of
Is there also is there something to the reality that today, at least for a lot of, past masterworks, there are such crazy high-res reproductions, accurate reproductions of these things. At least we know what they looked like versus something that burned up in 1880 that we never even got to see,
I reflect often on the goldfinch, right?
Sure.
So
Good
Fabricius
example.
painted it, and I mean, he was very young. The explosion that
Hmm.
killed him obviously burned up his paintings as well. But the Goldfinch, survived,
Hmm.
and it's become an emblem of that
Sure.
sense of loss.
Because of that. Sure.
Yeah, because of that, but also actually I have to say the popularized version through Donna Tartt, her
Hmm.
novel, and then the subsequent movie. Um, there just seems to be a life of a painting that shouldn't be corralled because of people's greed.
But you like
Uh,
to anthropomorphize paintings in that way.
well, I am now, yes, but I'm also looking at why we need to own something to give it life. And
But
that
even if but even the stuff that's at the Tate or at the Met, it's owned by someone. It's owned by the Tate or the Met. So where should it be?
fine, exactly. And
Should
this is
governments
this
own it? Should the UN own it? Like, how far up do you want to go up the onion food chain?
Yeah, I'm not saying that I have an answer for any of this. I'm not saying that there's
No.
something, this solution that I'm going to come upon. All I'm looking at is that I'm finding it increasingly ridiculous that so much of our art is hidden from sight.
Hmm.
Isn't there such a cruel irony in that?
Yeah. I mean, also that I bet you a lot of these rich muckety mucks who buy these things don't want people to know that they own them just from a security point of view.
Well, yes, I mean the anonymous bidders on the phone at
Yeah.
Christie's or Sotheby's.
I mean, the amount of art that Steve Martin owns is probably worth hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars at this point,
He
and no
was
one
on the
knows what
list.
half of it is. Yeah.
He was on the list, I think.
Yeah.
I just want us to finish. I was saying about this book that I read recently that I really enjoyed it, A Little Art Education by Lynn Barber. It is a collection of her experiences, little vignettes of her experiences of meeting artists. But the
Hmm.
thing that I found maybe pertinent to this talk is that Doris Saatchi, who's the ex-wife of Charles Saatchi, the
Hmm.
tycoon and art collector, said to Barber when she planned to interview art collectors. Lynn Barber decided that she wanted to interview more than just, I guess, politicals or other celebrities. She wanted to interview people within the art world, and she'd initially alighted upon this idea that she would interview collectors. And Doris Saatchi, who herself was married to a collector, said, "Not art collectors," she exclaimed. "They're all so boring. Concentrate on artists. They're the interesting ones."
It's true. I mean,
Yeah.
ultimately, the commentators and the owners and all the rest of it are much less interesting to me than the people who make the stuff in the first place.
But isn't there a place to say that the people who see the stuff are interesting too?
Sure, but the thing still exists whether or not people see it. I don't know. As a maker, I give the maker the benefit of the doubt most of the time.
But as an owner or a
Mm.
collector, is the need there to possess because then it becomes exclusive?
Well, do you also have a responsibility to protect that thing? Or once you own it, you can go take that Caravaggio and slice it up into dinner plates if you want.
All of this leads
Hmm.
us nowhere, which is fantastic, just as I
I
like
know.
it.
We end up right where we began.
Well, I mean, if not, then I think when we conclude, we stop questioning,
Sure.
and I hope we don't.
I'll drink to that.
Bye, Bill.
Bye, Sandi.